That's about Friday's incident. Pay attention to your safety at all times anyway. Um, but especially in the near future. Now, um, for today's class, I want to discuss the um, Huff transform. Oh, turn on the projector. We'll talk about the Huff transform. Before I want to do that, I'll talk a little bit about the project from a computer vision point of view. And then, if you are ready, you can do a demonstration of your assignment. So deadline for the assignment 1 is now finished. So after you're done, we will have a demonstration of your assignment. You can demonstrate it either today or next week. Okay? Yeah, we can get you a table. Right? I'd like to see it live too, though. Yeah, I still want to see it live when you demonstrate. There's a big difference between a demonstration and I can ask you some questions about the code and everything. Okay? Let me post that. Um, Okay, so if you have never been to a climbing gym, then this is kind of what the walls look like that you have to climb up. There are different colors that correspond for the different routes. And then the tapes here, the yellow tape means it's um, white is beginner, yellow is level 1, green is level 2, pink is level 3, and then you have to start climbing here with those two hands, and then only use the white boulders. And then if you reach there with both hands, then you finish the route, then that will be success. So that's the job that you have to do. That's the job that we want the robots to do. And there are these, this is what the walls look like. This is my wife, Wayne. Just for scale, she is 1.58 meters tall. And so that gives you an idea of how tall this thing is. Now for our rock climbing robot, we want to have much simpler geometry and simpler vision problems. So I think we will limit it. But ideally, we want to be able to climb in a real gym. So for the second assignment, you will have to extract the position and for all these markers, as many as you can get. So the different colored blocks on the wall you want to be able to find. And based on that, for some of them, you want to be able to identify their shape and the sort of active edge where the robot can actually hold. But the ones that we're looking at for the most important ones would be those. Those holes, these blue ones, they look always the same. And there would be one edge here that you can grip, and this part here that is sloped, so you cannot really grip them. So on here, you want to be able to identify this edge, not just the position, but you also want to identify the edge. For the other ones, you just want to be able to identify roughly the center of the bounding box where they're rotating. And for people, this is not very tricky. For computer vision, this is actually an interesting problem. So take an image from a climbing wall a little bit far away, and then identify center and bounding box for all holes. For the long, certain types of holes, you want to identify the orientation and the active edge where the robot can actually hold. So for that, you would can try different approaches, all the way from edge detection and template matching to deep learning approaches. And today I want to talk about the Huff transform. The most common application for the Huff transform is the detection of lines. It's the standard way for extracting straight line, infinite lines and straight line segments from an image. But the generalization, the generalized Huff transform is actually a very interesting approach that uses a problem reformulation that transforms the original problem of detecting a particular shape into what's called the Huff space, in a different kind of space. And this remapping actually makes it very very efficient and reasonably efficient and quite robust algorithm for detecting arbitrary shapes. So let's have a look. The Huff transform, named after mathematician Huff, is a methodology algorithm to find complex shapes inside of an image, something like finding holes. You could apply it to that. It's applied to the output of an edge detector or other kind of feature detectors, and its most popular application is in detecting lines and line segments. That's due to efficiency a little bit. More complex shapes will require more complex computation, so your algorithm will run slower. Now, one good thing about the particular problem that we have for assignment 2, recognizing these holes is not time sensitive in a sense. It's not a real-time problem, right? The robot sits still, the holes don't move. So even if it takes you a minute to detect where all the holes are, then that would still be reasonable, right? Then your robot just sits there, looks at the wall for 1 minute, and then knows exactly how to climb. Then okay, it's not a real-time problem in that sense. So here we have an original image, some scene from Taipei, and then before we can apply our Huff transform, we need to run an edge detection. So here I apply the Sobel edge detector in the X and the Y direction, and also the Laplacian edge detector and the Canny edge detector. Those are the popular ones from available in OpenCV. And here are the outputs. So here's the original image converted to grayscale, Sobel in the X direction, Sobel in the Y direction. The Laplacian operator is a little bit weak in the response. Okay. And the Canny edge detector, which is a more powerful, more complex algorithm to detect edges in images with the main goal of reducing duplicate pixels in edges and also um, for filling in. Uh, Now, if these are our images, and you should now do that yourself, so take an arbitrary image and apply. I think it's sufficient if you run Sobel X and Sobel Y, and then show me the output. And then we can start talking about the I just pull out the Sobel edges here to and here we go. The this should be 121, 122. here we can see the two Soho images side by side, and I can also combine them into one image. So this is just both of them combined. So let's see how far you got. You have the edge maps now. You can. Right now, I just need the edge map. You will do that for the assignment. But right now, I just want to see the edge map. You know, you can use any. Okay, how you get the diamond box? Okay. It's also part of the assignment, but not what I wanted right now. Right now, I just want the edge. Okay. So yeah, right now your output should look something like this. And you can do it on any image, doesn't have to be the climbing wall. If you want to, you can use that. Just implement the edge detection algorithm for side. Yeah. Then you can use the Tami or Solo X plus Solo Y. Any one of them will do. Right, so now we have that kind of image here, the cityscape. Then how do we detect lines? Like, first of all, what would you detect as lines in this particular image as a human? Well, then, for example, this part here on the roof, right? Most people would say that if you have a good line detector, this is what it should return, right? There's a pretty long line there that is the edge of the building and the roof. So in that case, for us that's easy because we know what these objects are. Also here, these two vertical lines, right? The edges of the building, we know that those buildings are built with straight lines. So yes, your line detection algorithm should return those. Right? Now our vision systems aren't that smart. For example, here, this part or this part, we probably wouldn't recognize the clouds. We wouldn't recognize as lines. We wouldn't consider those to be lines because we know that clouds are regularly shaped. However, there would be some lines here too. If you look at that one long thin cloud there, that looks exactly like a horizontal line. So, without any additional world knowledge, it's quite a difficult task for the algorithm to detect what the lines are. And I think what I can do is, and it will be quite interesting to do that. Actually, let me change this picture and threshold it. That should make it pop out a little bit more. So I generate a new image, which is the combination of the Sobel X and Sobel Y. Then I want to define a threshold. Now, of course, I could just pick some number, 200. If it's in bytes, if they are in this image, they're actually floating point. But if they were standard grayscale images with a single byte width, then that will give you values from 0 to 255. So you can say 128 or 190 or 64. I like to have algorithms that are a little bit more self-adjusting. So here I set the threshold to be 75% of the maximum, assuming that there's some kind of variance in the maximum, then that seems to be a reasonable threshold. And then image less than threshold is equal to 0, and if it's greater than the threshold, I set it to 1, because they're floating point numbers. So then that should do that. And then block image. Now that threshold is a little bit too thin, so let's make it 0.5. That's a little bit too few. Right. So now it's popping out more. Now all the pixels are either 0 or 1, so it's a binary image. So now if you look at it, then the problem is actually not that easy, right? I want to be able to detect lines, vertical lines, horizontal lines. Some of the lines are strong, but at an angle, so they're not all horizontal or vertical lines. Also, like these lines here, from the other roof of the buildings. They're at a 45-degree angle. And we have to deal with the fact that certain lines are broken, right? Like here, there's pixels missing. There's some pixels missing here, definitely in the clouds, they're missing, so on and so forth. So, for our line detection algorithms, those are going to be the major problem. Holes, pixels that, or that's what we assume are major problems in our line detection algorithm. Now, initially, Huff developed the algorithm, the Huff transform, exactly to deal with this particular problem. And the big realization, or the fundamental leap of reasoning, was that if I ask you about a particular pixel, like here, if you can only see that small part, right? If I ask you about this pixel here, does that belong to a line or not? Then that's really impossible to answer. If you only look at the 3x3 neighborhood, you won't be able to tell if something belongs to a line or not, because it may be a small artifact like these here, or it may be part of this, and they would both look the same. Right? You just have three pixels that are like 1, 2, 3, or 2 pixels and a hole. That could be part of the line, or that could be just noise and not be part of the line. So the realization is that whatever you do for complex shapes, you really need to reason about a whole collection of pixels, not just a single pixel. To detect whether something is an edge, you only need to look at that pixel and maybe the tiny 3x3 neighborhood or 5x5 neighborhood. But if you want to detect if something belongs to a line, then you need to know a lot more about the other pixels in the image. It's a collection of pixels that makes up a line. An edge is the feature of a single pixel. A line is a collection of pixels. In fact, we need to have pixels that are arranged in such a way that they form a line, that they form the shape that we're looking for. Now, let's approach this from a mathematical background. If I talk about the line in mathematics, then any line, almost any line, you can represent by its slope, okay, and what's called the y-intercept, where that particular line crosses the x equals 0 line. Right? So in high school, when you do intersection of lines, you always look at equations like that. Y is equal to ax plus b. Right? And then you can define different lines. So for example, y is equal to 2x minus 3. Then where would that line be? 2x plus minus 3. Okay. That would be not minus 3 would be the y-intercept, and the slope is 2, which means for every thing it goes up 2. So it will be this one. Right? And you can have other kind of lines. Negative 1x plus 5 would be somewhere like this. 45-degree angle going down. Right? But this equation gives a property for each pixel on that particular line. Right? Like this equation describes the entire line for every pixel. So it's a feature, or it's a description of all the all the points that make up this particular line. So the clever insight by Huff was that these collection of points, we can convert them into a mathematical representation, and we can do that by employing this transform into the Huff space. And that's a space of parameters to map a line. So instead of talking about the pixels in the image, the Huff transform transforms it into a different type of space, the Huff space, where we can describe these lines. Now, if I want to detect a line in the image, and I approach it from this formulation, then what do I actually want as the output of my algorithm? In order to be able to find a line, and at this point in time, we're talking about infinite lines, mathematical lines. They go from minus infinity to plus infinity. If I want to find those in the image, then what I need would be a set of parameters for all the lines in the image which were described by A and B. So I need to know what's the A and B for the first line in the image. What's the A and B for the second line in the image? Right? Once I have the parameters, once I have the values for A and B, then I would have found my line. Right? If you generate this, if this is your input image, what would this line be? This would probably be 0.5 x plus 1. If this is your input image, that's what you're looking at, then the correct, and you implement the line detection algorithm, if your algorithm returns 1/2, 1, 2, -3, and -1, 5, then that will be correct, right? That's the output that you want. In this case, you would have solved the problem. So the Huff space is the space that is constructed by looking at the parameters of the shape that you're trying to find. And the parameters for a line are, so far, two numbers, right? A and B. So in this case, our Huff space will also, we have a two-dimensional input image. Our Huff space will be a two-dimensional array where the rows correspond to the B's and the columns correspond to the A parameter. Okay, let me just make sure that yeah. Make sure that that's correct. Okay. So that's the Huff space. So now, how does that help us? Well, that would help us because now, for every edge pixel that I have, let's say I have an edge pixel here, that will have some coordinates, xi, yi, right? And now, the Huff transform basically says, okay, if that particular pixel, xi, yi, if that belongs to a line, then I can rewrite this, and I can say, what we have is yi is equal to a multiplied by xi plus b. Because that belongs to that line that has the unknowns of parameters a and b, now I can reformulate this. Because what I now know is before here, x and y are the unknowns and a and b are the knowns. We know what a and b is if we want to draw the line. If you want to find the line, and I have edge pixels that I know what x and y is, those are the coordinates of my pixel, but I don't know what the parameters a and b are. So the unknowns are a and b here, and then I can reformulate that. I can say that b is equal to yi minus a xi. And that's just rewriting the equation here. Now, what that means is this here, if yi and xi are known, and a and b are unknowns, then this again is an equation of a line. Right? Because it has exactly this format. It's one unknown, two unknowns, multiplied by some constant, xi in this case, and another constant y. So that means if pixel xi and yi belongs to a particular line, let's say I now start a, let's say I go from minus 10 to plus 10 here. If A is 1, and I have a particular pixel, then I get some value for B. And if A is 2, I get some other value for B. And if A is 3, I get some other value for B. So all those values together are going to correspond to another line. But now that line is not in the image, it's in the Huff space. It's in the parameter space. And what this line represents is, this represents all the possible lines that could go through this particular point here. If this point belongs to a line, then the line will be something like this, any one of these lines. Right? All of this I can represent in the Huff space. I will get another line. So given an edge pixel at position xp, yp, we assume that that pixel is part of a line. So we know that yp is a xp plus b for some parameters of the line, a and b. Now if I know the slope of the line, a, then I can rearrange the equation so that I can calculate what b should be. Given that xp, yp belongs to the line. And we end up with this equation. That equation above is, again, an equation for a line, but it's in the Huff space has a slope of negative xp and the line intercept of yp. So then we can just write some Python code to actually draw that. And that's basically what I just drew on the whiteboard. So we have a picture, xy space, where I have a point, P1. P1 belongs to the line. And now there's many different lines that can go through this particular point, right? 0.75x plus 2. That blue line is going to go through that point. That I can draw in the Huff space as 0.75 and then get a value of 2 for b. Now a different line also goes through point P1, so the line 0.25x plus 4 also goes through that point. That means it's going to be this line here, 0.25a plus 4. So that will be the red point. And the green line, negative 0.75x plus 8, is also going through this point. And that will be in the Huff space at this position here, negative 0.75x plus 8. Now every point in the Huff space corresponds to one line in the image, right? Like this red point here is this entire line in the image. This blue point in the Huff space is this entire blue line here. So as shown in the figure, all possible lines through a point P1 result in another line in the Huff space. Now how does that help us with finding lines? I mean, we can do this transformation here, right? We can do that, we get a line, okay, for an edge pixel, but how does that actually help us detect lines? Well, if I now have another point, P2, then I can plot all the possible points that will go through point P2 in a different line in the half space. The intersection of those two lines, that will give us the point in the half space that corresponds to the line that goes through both pixels, P1 and P2. So here we can have different points, and you can change the points, you can plot them. So now my previous picture with P1, now we have another point P2. And that corresponds, this one here, this line corresponds to all the lines going through point P1. This line here corresponds to all the points going through P2. The line that goes through both P1 and P2 will be this line here. It has a B has a y-intercept of 6.5 and slope of negative 0.5. Now in theory, that means if I have a pixel, an image, and I want to detect lines, I just need to find the line intersection of the lines in a half space, right? Because if I now have another point P3 that belongs to this line, it will be another line here in the half space. It should also meet exactly at this point. Right? The intersection will be exactly at this point. In practice, of course, it's a little bit more complicated than that because there will be noise in the vision system. So the various lines, the edge pixels, also due to the fact that we only have discrete positions for the pixels, that means the lines in the half space are usually not going to intersect exactly at one point. There's going to be some noise there. One solution would be to calculate the point that is closest to all the lines, or the point that minimizes the square distance to all lines. But that doesn't work if I have multiple lines in the image, because then the 2 points are going to be points that belong to the first line and points that belong to the second line in the image. Now, of course, we usually don't just have a single line in an image. So if we have multiple lines, there will be multiple intersections. So the second clever idea by Huff was overcoming this problem by discretizing the half space and then simply using an accumulator, which is like just counting up the number of times that the pixel is selected there. It's initialized to 0. It's a two-dimensional array in this case, where all the entries are initialized to 0. And then for every edge pixel, we iterate through the discretization of A. So let's say here I have -10. If I do steps of 1, then I have -10, -9, up to 0, 1, 2, 9, 10. So I would have 21 entries. 21 entries there. Yeah. And then I can say, oh, if A is 1, then B would be here. And if A is -9, then it will be here. And if it's -8, then it will be here. And now every time I calculate a value for B, then I add 1 to the particular cell. So here I would add these, right? And then it'll keep going like that. So in a sense, you can think about that as being a voting. So every discrete accumulator value that every discrete a value, um, slope value that I use, it votes for a particular b value, and then the one with the, after we have processed all the edge pixels, then we return the line that we want to return will be the one with the maximum number of votes. Because that means the maximum number of pixels support that there is a line in this particular direction. Now, that's the Huff transform in general. However, there's a couple of differences from the actual implementation and a couple of problems that you must be aware of. Um, for one, this slope intercept version of the line is what you use in high school, most likely. You've seen that in high school. However, it has some problems with respect to this implementation. The first problem is that you cannot represent vertical lines. The line like this, I would not be able to find using the Huff algorithm. But vertical lines are very common in images, right? So it would be a big problem not to be able to find them. The reason why we cannot find them is because in this representation, right, what would be the slope and the intercept of this particular line? What would be infinity? The slope would be infinite here, right? And the y-intercept doesn't exist. It would be not a number because it doesn't actually intercept with the y-axis here. It runs parallel. Actually, parallel lines intersect at infinity, so maybe there is some argument that there should be a y-intercept. But practically, that doesn't work. So we cannot have vertical lines. And the other problem is with the range. Here, we need to discretize our Huff space, which means I need to take the entire domain of the variable, like all the possible values that it can have, and break it down into smaller boxes, right? And for -10 to 10, that's pretty easy. That means 21 boxes, not a big deal. But even if I ignore vertical lines now, the possible range for the slope parameter would be basically -infinity to +infinity, right? So that's a really bad way to try and represent as a two-dimensional array if one of your dimensions is basically infinite, right? From -infinity to +infinity. So luckily, there's different parameterizations for a line. So one other parameterization for the line is given by in sort of like a polar coordinate version of the line equation. So here the line is represented by an angle alpha with the x-axis, which is from the origin to the line, the shortest distance. That's that angle. and then the distance from the origin to that particular line. Now here, we now have an angle. We have an angle alpha. So if you represent your angle as in degrees, then you would have a 0 to 360 degrees, right? Those are all the values that you can possibly have. So you can, if you take 10-degree buckets, then you would have 36 entries in your hub space, which is easily doable. If you want 1-degree resolution, then you would have 360 buckets. Now, the more you discretize your hub space, you usually expect that the accuracy will increase too. Because of this discretization here, it's also clear that I will not be able to distinguish two lines that are, for example, negative 9.9 and negative 9.6. Those two lines would end up in the same cell, right? So I won't be able to tell the difference between those two lines. But because there's noise in the image, we have to accommodate for some error anyway. So here we just have an angle, and then our distance from the origin to that line is also limited, right? Because it must be in the image. So it would be the square root of the width squared plus the height squared. Those are the possible values for B. Nothing else we can actually have there. So here is then an implementation of change, yeah, image. Just give me a second. Look. Should have resized it smaller. Right. So why? And make it smaller. Okay. Um, so I'm not sure what's going on here. I think I have to log in. Oh, yeah. So here is the output that we have from the image, threshold with input image zoomed in. Here's a histogram of the pixels, which tells us usually if you have any kind of computer vision algorithm or machine learning algorithm in general, if you're trying to detect certain features or responses of your classifier to some input data, then very often your output histogram looks something like this, or the other way around, like this. So there's kind of an exponential decay. You can see that here too in the edge pixels. So if I look at the strength of the edge pixels, how strong the response is, then you can see it drops very quickly here. Right? So for example, if I want to find all the edge pixels, in this case, this will be black. So there's many, many black pixels in this picture, right? With very small values. And then very few that are actually high. So if I want to go 0.4, 0.2, then I get most of the edge pixels. So that's, that way you can sort of figure out where this kickoff point starts. That's where you want to stop or change, set your parameter for thresholding, for example. What pixels you want to accept as edge pixels and what pixels you want to ignore it as black pixels. Another common algorithm or another reason why you would need to do that would be for clustering algorithms. There's for various clustering algorithms in machine learning. K nearest neighbor would be the simplest one. And that particular algorithm, so clustering is the problem of I have a bunch of pixels, let's say 2D data. And then I want to group it together and see how many different groups I have. So here we would probably assign these 3 groups, right? But of course, that's not the only clustering that you get. I could do this one here. I could have also 2 groups for those 2. Right? So a lot of the clustering algorithms, they start out by assuming, or you input as a parameter, how many clusters you expect, how many clusters there should be. Right? So in this case, you would add a parameter 3. It'll give you 3 clusters, the best 3 clusters it can find. You can set 4, the best 4 clusters you can find. And a common, but how to get this parameter is not trivial, right? Because you don't really know how many clusters to expect if you do a computer vision problem. Like here, you want to detect the number of holes in the image, right? Then of course you can come up with some kind of specifier and then say, oh, I cluster these together, I cluster these together, I cluster these together. But the problem is you don't know how many footholds there's going to be in the image. So then you have to either make a random guess, which is never a good idea. You can make a educated guess, and what you can do is you can look at the quality of the clusters. So here for the clusters, for example, what we want is that they're all close together, right? That would be one thing. And I want to have very high intra-cluster correlation. So the things that are inside of the cluster are supposed to be very similar. The distance between them is supposed to be very big. And on the other hand, I want very high intra-cluster differences. I want big differences between the clusters. And if you actually plot that, then you can say, okay, output the number of clusters if I only have 0 clusters, 1 cluster, and 2 clusters, and 3 clusters. And now this will go up like that, because if everything is its individual cluster, for example, you would have no errors in the classification. But you can see this kickoff point here. And then you would say, well, maybe this is 7. So then you would say, okay, let's take 7 as the number of clusters. And then cluster based on this idea. So this kind of exponential drop-off you can see very often in machine learning and other AI algorithms. So here I just use that to pick a number for the edge detection threshold. This is what I would have. And then here's the actual algorithm. My implementation for finding offlines. You pass in the number of buckets and the number for theta, which is the angle, and rho, which is the distance to the origin, right? This picture here. Using this representation of a line, we have here it's alpha not theta and rho. So I discretize the Hubs space, and then I iterate through for all the pixels in my image. So here I create the Hubs space. That's my two-dimensional array. And then that gives me a distance rho based on this particular angle here. And based on that angle, I then increment my Hub accumulate. I add 1 to it. So every pixel counts. Every pixel that supports a particular line counts as 1 volt. And then we can plot that. So here I just draw the Hubs space. It's a set of points. Now, in the original version of the Hubs space, every edge pixel corresponded with the line in the Hubs space, right? And then we would find the maximum. In the cosine parametric equation for the line, we actually don't get straight lines, but we get these sine cosine curves. So that particular input image here, this one, all of these white pixels all the edge pixels in here are going to result in this shape like that. And then here is the maximum. That's the particular cell with the most number of volts, which means this would be the strongest line in the image that we can find. Most edge pixels correspond and support this particular line, so I can read it off. So angle would be index 99, which I forgot what I used for the thing, and then the distance to the origin would be 75 pixels. So the equation of the line that we found is 71.32 is cosine 95.0 times x plus sine 95.0 times y. And then I can just draw the line from minus infinity to infinity, positive infinity. And here I do the same thing with a subset or smaller version of the image. With a smaller random image. Like I just generate some random pixels and then call find half lines. And then for this particular image, this would be the line that it actually finds for that particular picture. And I can run it again, that will give us a different line. Space, it will be the line that it finds. And how many pixels? 6 pixels that support that particular line. And 6 this pixel here. That's in the accumulator space, this is the closest line that it finds to that particular picture. Now, one of the interesting things, there's a couple of pitfalls, a couple of issues that you need to be aware of when dealing with the Huff transform, both for the line as well as the generalized version, which we'll talk in a second. One of the interesting problems is that if I give that particular algorithm, the one that I just implemented, the standard half-line algorithm, and this is my input image, then actually let me just change that a little bit. let's see, this is our input image. Then, and I now apply Huff transform and find Huff lines to this particular input image. Then what will be the output? What line will it actually find? Huh? No top and bottom. You mean like here? This part? No, it's only the black part that's the actual image. So you have to realize that the current implementation of the Huff lines, what we find is the longest possible line through the image, right? Because we add up. So independently of breaks, I pick the line that has the most pixels that support it. Now, when a human looks at this particular picture, then of course you would think the longest line would be this one here, right? That would be the longest line that I have in this particular picture. But actually, that's not the longest line I can draw through this picture, because what's the actual longest line? Or a different kind of picture. You can run it again. Like this. The longest line that I'd be able to paint through would be from here to there, right? This horizontal line. Because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 pixels. That's probably more than these pixels there. So it will return a horizontal line in this particular image, which for humans makes no sense. No person would ever say that that's the line. Nobody would say nobody would see a horizontal line in this image. So that's one of the caveats of the Huff-line algorithm. It tries very hard to make very long lines in the image that may not actually correspond to it. That should be 10. How come? Yeah. Like this it will be better. And then here's our Huff space. And here's the line that it actually finds in the algorithm. That's just blown up. So how can we avoid that particular problem? So in this case, the problem is that the half algorithm will find the line that is supported by the maximum number of pixels independently of the gradient of the edge pixel. That will often give us the incorrect line because the half algorithm does not take the actual direction of the edge, the gradient, into consideration. If you see this, right, then the gradient is horizontal. So there should be the line that goes through here should be vertical, right? Or at least approximately vertical. It doesn't make sense to have a gradient like this and then a horizontal line that goes through. So edge pixels that are on vertical edges can vote for horizontal lines and vice versa. So we can fix that problem easily by restricting the voting, right? So we restrict votes by the local gradient. We look at the gradient of the pixels. And for example, pixels that are very strong in the x direction in Sobo correspond to vertical lines. So vertical lines, those edge pixels, will only be allowed to vote for vertical lines. The Sobel X triggers on vertical algorithms. So that means you restrict completely, so no horizontal, no edge pixel with a gradient in the x direction is allowed to vote for lines that are going in the x direction. That will be one way. Another one is you can actually use the voting. You can apply partial votes. Like if your gradient is 45 degrees and the line that you're voting for is negative 20 degrees, you get to vote by 0.1 instead of plus 1. So you can give a little bit of a vote to an angle that is off the gradient direction. So here we have 1 minus the difference between the local gradient as a vote. And diff returns 0 or 1. Between 0 and 1, some value between 0 and 1, which then determines the magnitude of your vote. So that's the first problem. The second problem is, here I only have one line, right? But if you look at the original image, so there it's okay. But with real images, we have multiple lines. So here in this particular picture, we have multiple lines. And that means this one is the maximum, but there's also some other parts from other lines that are also very bright, have a strong response. Now some of this is going to be due to noise. Some of it is going to be due to multiple lines in the image. So to detect multiple lines, we find the next largest maximum in the accumulator. That is not too close to the previous maximum. So if they're side by side, it usually is some rounding effect, some noise in the pixels. But if they are quite far apart, then it corresponds to two different lines. Now, that is actually not quite correct in the way that we're doing it. in order to speed up the algorithm, we're taking a shortcut here because we look at our Huff space here. Then that's the strongest line that we find. Another big center would be here. So there's two lines there. Right? They're not too close together. Now I could just return and say I found two line segments. But technically that's not correct because those pixels that belong to that line also voted for this line. Right? So there's a couple of more votes here. Sorry, the ones that voted for this line, the pixels that belong to this line also voted for that line. And this cluster here, there's another big cluster there, or a large value there. So it's not quite correct to just take the maximum, the second largest, the third largest in order to get. What you would have to do technically to be correct would be you process the image, you find the maximum line, then you remove all of those pixels from the image and then run the entire Huff algorithm again to find the next line. Then you remove those pixels, then you find the next line, so on and so forth. Now, that will be computationally very expensive. And most of the time, you would be redoing the same calculation. Like, there's not that much influence from this line to this line, for example. So in practice, we simply go and we extract the maximum, and then the next maximum, next largest, so on and so forth. Okay, and the last problem that we have is that for the Huff space, we have some image of a house, and I want to find the lines, so I want to find these lines here. In the image, we actually only have line segments. We don't have infinitely long lines. Right? It's a part of the house, the wall, that generates a line. They're usually not from the top to the bottom. They don't go through the entire image. So, how do we find the actual line segments? Well, kind of, there's some optimizations that you can do, but the basic idea is that I now know the line that I'm looking for. If I want to find the line segment, then I start on one edge of the image, and then I go pixel by pixel until I have the first edge pixel. That's my start of the line. And then I keep going until my line ends. Then this would be the end of the line, and this would be the line segment. So once I have the equation, I can go through the image and I can look and see where's the beginning of that particular line, where's the end of that particular line. That is, in theory, that's what we do in practice. Of course, there are some problems because often we have breaks in the line. That was the whole point of implementing a more complex algorithm than just following the edge pixels along. If there were no breaks, we could just do that. So then we say, okay, well, if one pixel, if I have a hole of size 1, I just keep going. Then the line probably continues. So then you're like, okay, if there's a minimum of 5 pixels that are all black, that are not edge pixels, then the new line segment starts. Or 5 or 10 or how many you have. So that's a kind of hacky approach, but that's what we have to do. Also, just because 2 lines continue doesn't actually mean that they belong to the same object. So here, for example, down here in this area, this part and this part may be close together, these 2 lines, but I don't know if they belong to the same roof or not. They may be 2 different houses, in which case you really would want them to be 2 separate line segments, instead of just painting them with one more cross. So line segments, we're interested in line segments, not infinite lines. So we need to find the start and the end of the line. We usually start at one end and then we keep going until we find an edge pixel, and then we have the start. Or if it's just a single pixel, sometimes, often we ignore it. We keep going until we have 3 pixels in a particular range. And we continue until along the lines until there are no more edge pixels, and that's the end of the line. That's it for our Huff transform for lines. Now, the interesting thing is that we can apply the same idea and the same approach to find arbitrary shapes, not just lines. So we can find circles. That's also usually done using Huff lines, Huff's transform. So we want to extend this idea of the Huff transform by taking a shape and representing it with its set of parameters. Let's say I want to detect the climbing holes, and the climbing holes look like that. So this one here, one of them that sloped like to the right. I don't actually have one in this picture, but let's say I'm trying to look for this hand here, right? This hand-shaped climbing hole, except it's rotated 90 degrees. This one here, this one. Then I may say that the shape looks like that. And then, of course, we could use, if I know the color, I could do a template match, but that would be very susceptible to changes in illumination. But it would work, so we can apply template matching. OpenCV has a filter to D algorithm for doing that, and returns it. Then this would be the output. So here's my original input image. This would be the output of the template matching convolution. This would be the maximum response here. No big issue there. But with the Huff transform, we can be more robust with respect to errors and missing pixels in the shape. We can find any shape that we can represent by a fixed number of parameters using this approach. So let's say here's my original input image, now distorted by noise. Then the idea of the generalized Huff transform is that I now look for every edge pixel. I basically do the same thing. I look for every edge pixel, and then I say if this particular pixel belongs to the shape, what will be the parameters of the shape that I'm finding? So, given that problem with the climbing hole, then I have an input image, and I'm just looking for this shape, right? Or not so many. So otherwise I have to go. I'm looking for this particular shape, and I have some pixels here. Right? And I'm trying to look for the shape using a generalized Huff transform. Then I map it to the Huff space. Now, in order to be able to do this mapping, I need to know the parameters of the shape that I'm trying to find. Now, what will be the parameters of the shape? If I'm looking for this in the image, then what do I actually need as output? So that I can say, yes, I found it. Well, then, in order to define this shape in this particular image, I would, let's say, pick one point as a hot point, just so that I can say, okay, this is the position. So, for this shape in the image, the parameters that I need to know would be just x and y. where it is, the location of it in the image. So now, if this is the template that I'm trying to match, let's say we're looking at this particular pixel here. We're looking at this particular pixel here, the green pixel that we find in the image. Then I could say if that pixel matches to this pixel, so here's the green pixel, then the rest of the shape would be like this, and the location would be this and this, right? Because that's how I define the location of the shape. So then this cell here in my accumulator would be +1. But now I don't know which pixel I actually found, right? Maybe that green pixel is not that pixel, but maybe it's this pixel that belongs to, let me plot it smaller. I could think it's this shape, or I could also think that it's this shape, right? If that green pixel corresponds to this pixel, then the shape would be this location here that I get. So same row, but different color. Or that pixel here is actually that pixel in the original shape, which would give me this one, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. In this case, the shape would be located at this location here. And if, now I run out of colors, oh, I still have one more. If it's that pixel, if that green pixel belongs to here, then it would be this shape. Right? In which case it would give us this response and this row here. So that's the idea of the generalized Hopf transform. We now take the feature points that we have and we check where they belong to the original image, where there is an overlap. Now, that's okay. That's what is implemented here. See if that shape has a pixel there, then I set the location and I increase the accumulator. Now, that's if I want to detect this simple shape there or the letter J. This will only work now as long as the shape is not rotated, right? Otherwise this will fail, just like template matching. Template matching will also fail if the shape is rotated. Now, Hopf transform, we can deal with that because I can extend this and I can say that the Hopf space, the parameters that I have, if that shape can also rotate, then it will be a three-dimensional array where I have x and y, And here I would have rotation angle theta, right? By how much it's rotated. So then you would get more complex scenarios. So if this shape is rotated by 10 degrees, let's say it would look like that, right? And then you would say, okay, if it's 0 degrees, you would do this. If it's 10 degrees, you rotate it first, then you check where there's an overlap. If it's 20 degrees, 30 degrees, 40 degrees, so on and so forth. So then that would allow you to find that shape anywhere in the picture, even if it's rotated. Now, if we're dealing with the camera in the real world, things get bigger when they get closer to the image. So you may have to deal with scale. So then you would end up with a four-dimensional half space where you have x, y, theta, the orientation, and s, the scale. So now you have a four-dimensional accumulator space. And you can, in theory, you can extending this further. However, in practice, now you end up running into hardware issues, hardware constraints. The amount of memory, if this is a picture here, and it's 640 times 480, right? Then, what is that? That is 136,000. So then, if you just want to know the location, you have 130,000 kilobytes, 130 kilobytes roughly, right? So that's okay. That's easily represented. If you now have 36 different angles that you need to go through, then you have your runtime will multiply by 36, right? Because your loop has to go through all this time. And the memory is going to be 36 times higher because you need to have one of these for every angle that you're considering. So then you have 3.6 megabytes, something like that. Now, if you have 10 different sizes, then you have 36 megabytes all of a sudden in your table. That then the amount of memory that you need grows exponentially with the number of dimensions that you have. Right? It's the number of possibilities for the first dimension multiplied by the number of possibilities for the second dimension, multiplied by the third, multiplied by the fourth. So if you go up to 10, then you end up with huge numbers that will overrun your memory most likely. So that's why in practice, for the generalized half transform, 4 to 6 is kind of the maximum you would even consider. Okay, and then here's just the implementation. This is our input image, the generalized half transport form, and here will be the output of the convolution. This one would find the maximum here. Here we have a slightly better view of that. So for the rock climbing wall, the parameter space that you would be looking at would be basically 2 3-dimensional, right? Because because it will be x, y, and the angle of the hole that you want to recognize. If I want to find this shape in that image, I could apply the generalized half transform in order to be able to find it. And that would work, and then you can rotate it through and pick the best orientation for the shape. And again, we won't have so many different shapes. We will have only 3 to 5 different, so then you can just run your half transform on those 5 shapes. And I don't know, with the robot, if we take pictures close in, I think if we've done it before, and then you can actually get a good enough map of this wall without, from just the camera like here, and that's where the wall is. You get a good enough, accurate enough map in order to be able to control the robot trying to climb without having to look at the hole, which would make things easier. Right? Otherwise, if the robot has to look at the hold, actually for the feet, I think most climbers don't look at their feet unless it's a very difficult kind of foothold or something. I guess they should, but usually you just know where it is and then you step. You don't need to look. Like I don't need to walk like this either. So we will, the first part is to find the map of some real world climbing gym. For the actual robot, then we will limit it to just 3 different types of holes and simpler setup. Or alternatively, if you want to, you can build a robot that can climb any wall in that gym. If you can do that, you automatically get your PhD from MIT. Then they will be very happy to have you, because that will be a major achievement in robotics. That's a very difficult problem. Like I don't even know how to approach that, and you have things where not only are the holes small, and you would need to exert enough force to be able to hang on to them. But looking at this, if you have done some climbing, then just looking at the picture, you can sort of figure out what kind of grips you can do on the particular hole. And most of the time you're correct. Like these hands, you kind of know that you can grab like this, or you can grab it like this. These ones, the other thing you learn when climbing is that some of them I know are going to be horrible just because they're so damn small. So the smaller they are, the harder they are to grab. So you wouldn't want to use any of those for handholds unless you really have to. So most likely the really small ones are where you're supposed to use your feet. Like I'm pretty sure here, I don't know where you go up, but the blue root here, blue, 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 blue. This one here, you are probably not supposed to try and hold on to that because they're so small. Same as this one here. This one here, definitely you probably won't have to use your hand, because this would be a very good hold. Like this is like a ladder. Like you can actually hold on there very strongly. The other ones are all in the middle. But here, for example, you know that there's some hole here. These are holes. Smallish for the feet. This one definitely foot. This one because it's so low and small. Uh, so that's it. And of course, different background colors and different colors for the holes. Okay, good. Then for today, I suggest you should implement the Huff transform for lines. What I discussed so far is the specific um, original implementation or algorithm proposed by Huff. You can also, you should now take a picture from the climbing holes or any other kind of image that you have and then extract lines, but use the Huff-Lines P algorithm, which is a probabilistic version of the Huff-Line algorithm that returns line segments and it executes quite a bit faster. It takes some shortcuts in order to be able to deal with the accumulator slightly more efficient. But in practice, it's good enough. So most of the time, if you're looking for lines in the image, line segments in the image, which is what you usually do, you want to use the CV2.HuffLines-P algorithm and then just set the parameters and then see what output you get on. Actually, you can crop this image. You don't need to actually take the whole image. If you don't want to process the entire image, you can also cut out a small part of it and then run your Huff-Lines algorithm for the last 20 minutes. And then we're finished with the class today. And next week we have the midterm. Now for the midterm, everything I discussed in class will be examinable material. You must have a GitHub account because the exam will be administered using GitHub. So you'll do a GitHub pull to get the exam and then implement most of the questions require some kind of programming. Then you submit your solutions. Let me just make sure I post that on. So the midterm is open book, open internet. You can use ChatGPT. And can log in. And like I mentioned last time, the question style is usually computation. In my view, is always, or most of the time, it's you have some input, you have an algorithm, and you have some output. So the simplest question would be, what here's the input image, this is the algorithm, what would the output look like? Then sometimes I like to answer variations of that. For example, here's the output of the edge detection, what did the input image look like? Or is this image possible input to generate this particular output using half lines? And the third part would be, here's the input and here's the output. What was the algorithm, or what were the parameters of the algorithm? So here's the input image. This is the output image. Did we use a Laplacian or a Sobel image detection? So now, as an exercise, you can implement using half lines P. And then we're finished for. Okay, I'll stop the recording.